Sir.
Oh, how nice.
Simha
Yeah.
sir.
Good af- Right.
Lovely.
A whole entire counseling team of Karnasha waiting to listen to you.
Oh, wow.
Great.
Seema has that power to attract.
Oh no, it's made me nervous now.
Oh, will it help if I put off the video?
अब जो damage होना था वो हो चुका है.
हो
What you
गया.
guys get? I actually WhatsApp you, Seema. Obviously, you didn't check your WhatsApp.
No, I didn't.
Just 2 minutes ago. Wishing you good luck.
Good.
Well, we are all here for a conversation. I think we are all here to just, you know,
Oh, I have a couple of people from my mentee group here.
that's lovely.
Devika and Muskan, I can see.
We will just, we are just waiting for a bunch of people to join in. So we will take a couple of minutes to let people join in, and then we will start.
Sure.
I have been curious whether, you know, it is the nature of the topic and the timing with the current times, or it is the power of these wonderful women that has brought a very large number of people to register for this program, or it is my team going on a like reach out. It could be a combination of all.
Yeah, well, I think it's a topic
I
also
will,
that.
Yeah, I will not answer that question
No?
because I'll get into trouble.
Oh no.
No, I think it's a combination of everything. For me, of course, the topic is very very important, and your team has done an awesome job. But I know that Seema is awesome because I've worked very closely with her for a long time, and I respect her ability to convey things very gently, unlike me. So it's nice to listen to this girl.
Thank you.
Sure is.
I totally resonate and agree with you.
And the topic is important. Yeah.
It is. It is. I remember the first time I read the phrase, I was, you know, so intrigued because in just 2 words, it conveys a whole world, right? It's one of those phrases that are, it's a concept that's easy to understand just by, you can have a meaning just by the name. And of course, it triggers a lot of curiosity as well.
So who's going to do the slide sharing, Bhavna?
I can do
it from your side.
I can do that. I will do that.
Thanks.
Guys, audio.
Audio is fine. Audio is fine.
The participants who are online already, can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, great. So I suppose there will be a bunch of people who will join subsequently, but in order to respect all those who are online already, it's a good idea that we start. A very warm welcome to all of you, and good evening. We are delighted to have you all. I have to say that we have a very large gathering today. Just a while ago, we were discussing that what might be the reason for this very large audience. I have to say I'm delighted to invite you on behalf of my organization, Caregiver Sati, and to have panel members today for our discussion on compassion fatigue, what it means, for us to understand that, and for us to to know what we can do in order to cope with compassion fatigue. Um, I am now going to share my screen. And start with
Mute everybody else, Bhavna. Otherwise, you may get a lot of crosstalk. Or
yes.
ask everybody to mute themselves.
Yes, I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves. Could you please mute the speaker on your devices so that you know, we can make sure there is less disturbance. I'd like to start with a brief introduction to Caregiver Saathi. Caregiver Saathi is an endeavor to create an ecosystem of well-being and healing for the primary caregivers. What we are trying to do is that family caregivers of those navigating terminal illness, chronic conditions, and any other life-limiting conditions have their unique challenges, and we support them through their caregiving journeys and beyond. What we wish to do is to create an environment of well-being by empowering the caregiver. We help the caregiver and the care receiver or the patient lead full lives. How do we do this? We do this through psychosocial support systems like easy access to information and relevant content, healing circles, one-on-one counseling and coaching, by building capability for caregivers through learning programs and technology-based support to empower caregivers and their well-being. We also are working on a volunteer program to provide respite care. We have a variety of resources for you that are accessible through our website. That's caregiversaathi.co.in and a monthly newsletter. We also present information through our social media handles, and we have a community that we work with through Facebook, as well as our WhatsApp groups. We run a variety of video series. These are caregiver stories that we call Gentle Warriors, where we encourage caregivers to tell their stories, because we believe telling your stories is as healing as listening to others' stories, and that can be very encouraging to those who are in their caregiving journeys. We also run a video series called Compassionate Caring, which is experts sharing points of view, concepts, ideas, so that caregivers can have a perspective during their caregiving journeys. This webinar series is a part of the Compassionate Caring series that we run. Finally, we have a Caregiver Saathi app, which is a tool to help caregivers organize themselves and find resources with which they can navigate through their journeys. I would like to take a minute to tell you that our idea of well-being has 7 elements of well-being. We work with these 7 elements to support caregivers, and these elements include physiological, financial, legal, psychological, social, and spiritual well-being, in addition to life and work purpose, as well as creative expression. So I would think a conversation around compassion fatigue would fall under psychological well-being significantly, but it may have elements you will find of social and physiological well-being, and we will discover that with our guests today. Stress is often caused when there is an imbalance in our overall well-being, and in order to address it, we may need to break it down to its various elements so that we can work with it in a practical and meaningful fashion. Unaddressed chronic stress over a long period of time can lead to mental health issues. And there is merit knowing about it, anticipating it, and preventing it. Having said that, there is also hope, and there are ways for us to manage it if one feels that one has had significant stress or perhaps burnout over a long period of time. There are many people that have participated. I request you to put yourselves on mute so that there isn't disturbance and that we can continue with the session. Thank you. And with that, I would like to introduce the two wonderful women that we have today, Prachi Vesh and Dr. Seema Rao. They have some incredible resumes, and it is only fair that I take you through them. Prachi Vesh is a licensed clinical psychologist and a psychotherapist. She's been working in the field of mental health for over 15 years. She's founded India's first online psychotherapy website, hopenetwork.in, in 2009, and recently revamped it to a new platform, the Emotional Wellness Initiative. She has contributed thousands of articles on various aspects of mental health for web and print media like Femina.in, Child Better Homes and Gardens, Lifestyle Asia India, and tweakindia.com. She works with clients on issues of relationship, intimacy, unconventional sexual lifestyles, anxiety disorders, and recovery from trauma of emotional abuse. She also works closely with clients to aid them in personal growth so that they can lead fuller and happier lives. That is Prachi Vesh for you. Prachi, would you like to say hello? So that the others can recognize you. Okay, and the second panelist is Dr. Seema Rao, who has completed her postgraduate studies in psychiatry in the year 2001 from Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, Bangalore. Her work in the field of mental health involved working with vulnerable and the abandoned, the destitute elderly, those with dementia and chronic mental illness in Mumbai. She completed the National Fellowship in Palliative Medicine in 2013 and joined TMH, or Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai, as a Senior Research Fellow in the Geriatric Palliative Care Project. During her tenure of 6 years at TMH, she was responsible for the clinical and administrative functioning of the 13-bed inpatient respite palliative care facility. Dr. Rao completed her master's in palliative medicine with distinction from Cardiff University, UK in Jan 2019. She was awarded the Commonwealth Scholarship to pursue her MSc. She is currently working as a senior consultant in the Department of Palliative Medicine and Supportive Care at Kasturba Medical College and Hospital at Manipal. She is also an honorary tutor at the School of Medicine, Cardiff. She's a full-time faculty and consultant with Palliative Care Training Program for Cancer Treatment Centers in India, which is a collaborative effort of Lien Collaborative for Palliative Care, Asia Pacific Hospice, and Palliative Care Network in New Delhi, Kasturba Medical College, and Hospital Manipal. As a palliative care physician, her role encompasses management of physical symptoms in advanced cancer patients, psychosocial care of patients and their caregivers, and end-of-life care. I particularly love this part, which is that she has a special focus and interest in psychospiritual care. While she is a physician by profession and a writer by choice, she pens her creative thoughts on her blog that you may want to pick up, randommusing69.com. with that, I would like to say, Seema, would you like to say hello?
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Prachi?
Hello, good evening, everyone. I think I was speaking earlier and my mic was on mute and I did not even realize. Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction, Bhavna. It's wonderful to be here with you and Seema today.
Yes.
And yeah, we are so excited to see so many people coming in, and we're looking forward to having a really good discussion today.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time. I'm particularly delighted because Dr. Seema Rao is based in Bangalore. You are in Lucknow. I'm in Mumbai. And we are virtually all together. And there are so many participants from across the world. So I am delighted to create this space. Compassion fatigue, like I was saying, was a... May I once again request everyone to put yourself on mute, and I will try and do that so that we are not disturbed. And I will encourage you to use the chat box to put your comments and to raise questions. So I would like to remind you that there are 3 parts to this webinar. The first part will be a small brief presentation or discussion by Prachi and Seema, followed by questions and answers. And we will have a section on suggestions and feedback. So with that, a few other announcements being that you to keep yourself on mute. I will try my best to mute those if we hear some noise. Please do not mind that. It is in the interest of having an amicable discussion. We have taken all security precautions. We do not have these sessions as an open forum. We like to record who is signing in. So we have used encryption for third-party endpoints. So what's shared cannot be accessed digitally outside the meeting room. We will provide you instructions for each section, and the webinar is being recorded. Participants are requested not to record the meeting using any other device as a respect for others' privacy. While we are recording this webinar, some sections of the panel discussion may be used for sharing later. However, no section of the participant interaction will be disclosed publicly. So please feel free to raise your questions and have as open a discussion as possible. Your feedback and suggestions is critical for us to design further programs on this subject or other subjects. And with that, I am going to ask Prachi to tell us what is her take and understanding on a subject like compassion fatigue, especially when she thinks about family caregivers. Prachi? Prachi, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you, Bhavna. I think I'm very enthusiastic about muting the mic. Yeah, so I was saying that it's a really huge area of scope when we talk about compassion fatigue, and I think I first heard about it probably somewhere around 2013 when I was looking for a subject for my MPhil thesis, and I happened to, during some reading, I happened to come across this concept, and I was completely intrigued by it because it looks at fatigue or burnout in a very specific sense, where it relates to an aspect of you when you care for someone, and that special kind of fatigue that you come into, or a burnout that you experience at that point of time. But this compassion fatigue, when we are talking about in a caregiver concept, it can happen in 2 dimensions. It can happen with professional caregivers, and it can happen with family members also. I will talk about a little bit about how family members go through it. And I was just talking about this whole concept with a friend the other day, the caregiver concept, and we came across this idea that in a country like India, um, a lot of times the concept of caregiver is not a very familiar one, because in so many families by default people are caregivers.
Yes.
And when you talk about that cultural fabric, it's like an unofficial responsibility that you have, or something by default that you do when your parents age or someone in the family is taken ill, or some sort of disability. So a lot of times people don't identify themselves as caregivers. It just becomes a part of the family fabric, and that really mm, sort of blurs the lines of the role that they play, because on one hand they are in relation to the person that they're caring for, but at the same time they are also um, fulfilling this responsibility of 24 hours being responsible for someone or taking care of someone. This leads to a lot of role confusion, like I said, but also resentment sometimes. Um, Fatigue is not recognized. Fatigue becomes taken as just a part of what my life has become now, and it doesn't get identified, and because it doesn't get identified as fatigue, it doesn't get the care that it should, for the person to find some healing or some respite from what they are doing. I'll give you a personal example. My father was bedridden a few years ago, in the last few months of his life. He was a diabetic and passed away because of multiple organ failure. And my mom, obviously by default, became his caregiver in those last few months. And my parents did not have a very good marriage. So when she took on that role out of a sense of responsibility, because it was her who had to care for him, there was a lot of internal struggle that I would witness. I wasn't there with them at that point of time, but in our conversations and everything. So she knew that she should be the one to take care of this person, but at the same time, the reciprocation wasn't there in terms of the acceptance of the credit, or the appreciation and reciprocation. So after a while, it starts to really take a toll. So that went on. I was recently speaking to a client, and when he was talking about the fact that he and his parents separated when he was a young child, and recently, his father became paralytic, and he didn't have very good relationship with his father, but he respected him and everything. And he became paralytic, and then he felt responsible all the time as a caregiver for the father, but at the same time he was torn between his responsibility or the relationship with his mother, and then that created a whole big scene. So I think this happens a lot in a family scenario, and it doesn't get the due recognition that it should, and which leads to the person internally sort of hollowing out and really running out of psychological resources to put in the amount of effort which is required to care for the person as well as to care for themselves.
There are a couple of points that you made that ring home. For example, caregiving traditionally is, although you gave two examples, one of a man and one of a woman. But if you look at it in a broader sense, caregiving is a gendered role. And it is documented that 60 to 80% of the time, caregivers are women. And there are stereotypes of women, so there is so much media as well as stories and social pressure that women are self-sacrificing, they do not necessarily think about themselves, etc. So their care for themselves comes last. And very often in family relationships, it would get only compounded that, there is an ask from the caregiver continuously. And if there is no scope for replenishment, then there could be tiredness. And sometimes we do not see it. Sometimes we do not recognize it. And what do you think about the expression of feelings like anger, guilt, and frustration, and that role with compassion fatigue for family caregivers?
Yeah, that's a really nice point that you've raised, Bhavna, because when it comes to expression of emotions, I think somewhere all of us end up placing a negative or a positive balance on emotions. This is a negative emotion, or this is a positive emotion, and this is supposed to be expressed, and this is not supposed to be expressed. And we all grow up in that whole environment, and it differs slightly from family to family and everything. But then, more or less, we all have this basic idea of what are negative emotions and positive emotions. But the fact is that emotions do not have a negative or positive value. Uh, some of them are comfortable, some are uncomfortable.
Yes.
But when the expression of it is brought up, especially in a scenario like you just talked about, somehow the idea is that the person who makes the maximum sacrifices is the good person.
Yeah.
And somebody who makes a lot of sacrifices is also somehow demeaning that sacrifice by voicing that they are tired, or they are frustrated or angry even. Whereas it is perfectly natural to feel angry. There are so many people in families who have had to change their entire life courses, career courses, because some disability happened in the family, or somebody fell ill or bedridden and they had to be taken care of, and this person had to change their entire life course. It's natural to feel angry, and it's natural to want to express that. But when you express that, somehow your entire investment into the situation or the sacrifice becomes lessened, and that, I think, stops a whole lot of people from even acknowledging that I am feeling these things, because you do so much, and then somebody turns around and tells you that if you're doing so much, why are you complaining about it? But it's not really about complaining. It's about an expression of emotion, and somewhere this idea needs to be brought in that we are all humans and we all go through certain emotions, and just because someone is expressing a certain emotion doesn't mean that they are wanting to let go of the situation. An emotion is something that comes in waves. It comes and goes. It's neither good nor bad. So that's what it is.
And I do think that, the recent Oxfam report that spoke about women doing a large amount of unpaid care-related work in homes has a significant contribution to make, because this work is not really valued in its monetary terms. And because it is not valued in its monetary terms, it's not seen as work done. And because it is not seen as work done, it can get accumulated. Um, I think this will trigger many conversations, and looking at the world of family caregivers has its own unique thing. I'd, however, like to move over to Dr. Seema and get her perspective on compassion fatigue in general, and specifically around healthcare practitioners.
Good evening, everybody. When I would like to share a sort of a personal experience when we talk about compassion fatigue. Sometimes, even as professional caregivers, we get blindsided by it. We know it is out there. We might be looking out for it also, but when it happens to us, most of the time we don't realize. The first slide, actually.
Yes.
Next one. Yeah. So basically, no, go back. Yeah. Yes, that's it. So the thing is, you're surrounded by profound loss when you're working, especially in a field like, you know, when we are mental health professionals or in palliative care. When a person is sick, what happens is we are surrounded by profound loss. People are grieving, who come to us are grieving, and sometimes we get entangled in that process altogether. A simple example: I moved to Manipal about a year ago, and my home is Mumbai, but I have joined, I mean, I'm working here in Manipal since the last 1 year. I'm staying alone. And as a palliative care physician, I am going into the ICUs to provide end of life care and to have discussions with families. I come across probably a 16-year-old, one boy was there who had a injury, cervical injury. He's totally paralyzed from the neck down onwards, and he is put on a ventilator. And he was so breathless when I went to see him. I saw him just before he was put on the ventilator, and it was the look on his face, the fear on his face, that has remained with me. Or when I'm counseling a mother, telling her that her a child or a child is brain dead after a road traffic accident, the grief sort of hits me, you know. At that point, when I'm saying I'm a doctor, I'm just conveying a message, but I also have a lot of empathy. I'm compassionate, caring is what we look at, and I'm trying to make her understand that the child is gone, the child is brain dead, and the grief hits you as the mother is going through it. Or, you know, I've had this multiple discussions, whether it is husbands, whether it is wives, parents, siblings, children saying goodbyes to their father. And what I noticed is, after this discussions, I come back home, I'm sort of drained out, and I just plonk myself on the sofa without even changing. And I don't know how the hours go by with me sitting. I need that silence. I need that peace. Okay? And this has been happening in the last 6 to 7 months. This has been ongoing. And I wake up after around, I doze off. I wake up after about 1 hour, 2 hours. Then I go have a bath and go around my routine, and then come back the next day and go through the same process again, right? And this death, suffering, despair is what I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I realize when my mother calls up, my conversations are getting with her. I'm avoiding calling her. Some of my friends can something the mic, please.
Seema, there is a little, there's an echo and the voice quality. Could you just look at that, please?
Okay. Is this better now?
Oh, there's an echo.
Oh. We'll go about it.
Maybe there's another device next to you.
Let me try to log in through my phone. Is the echo still there?
No, this is better.
Yeah?
Much better.
Okay. So, so as I was saying, no, I'm not on your phone. I'm not using your phone. Yeah. So, as I was saying, so over a period of time, this sort of piles up within you, and I realized I was watching myself, that my conversation with my family was getting shorter. I was avoiding some friends who had a lot of problems, and you know, I used to be the go-to person for friends with problems. Now those people, I don't want to hear anything negative. I'm not watching news because I'm not able to bear the negative news. I'm sleeping 4 hours, 5 hours, right, a day. And I'm constantly anxious. And some of those expressions that I see in the minds and in the faces of the caregivers or even the patients are remaining with me even when I go home. One of the methods of self-care that I use is write. And for the last 6 to 7 months, I hadn't written anything. Couldn't concentrate enough to write. Okay. And I know I am taking classes on self-care. I'm talking to people about compassion fatigue. It took me a lockdown to give me the space to look into myself and reflect that, yes, I was going through this process of, I was and I'm becoming progressively irritable and avoiding some of those conversations with the patients up to the point. Okay, it's the usual. I saw it happening within myself, but I didn't recognize it until the lockdown gave me a break. I started off this work as a, they talk about phases in compassion fatigue. Okay, one is what we call the zealot. You're so entrenched in caring, like you want to do everything for your patients, you want to see them, you are functioning at that superwoman level, 24 hours a day you are with your books, and being alone gave me the time to do it. But this phase is also not very good, isn't it? You need to have those work-life balance. I was enjoying my job so much that I kept everything at bay. And then came the irritability. I don't know when it crept in. And then I went into that withdrawal phase when lockdown happened. Probably if lockdown hadn't happened, I would have kept on going in the same manner. And they call what they call the zombie phase, where you are just functioning without the emotional touches that you have. And then finally you sort of, you go into that terrible phase of physical and emotional exhaustion, and your work output starts getting affected. So that's how it progresses. And then on, if you don't correct yourself at that point in time, probably is where you will have go into a burnout, develop psychosocial distress, multiple things. Can I have the next slide, Amna? Just click, yeah. So there are a lot of things, that they say. There are signs, there are symptoms. Some of the things I looked at into myself when I saw in this experience was, one, what I saw was those intrusiveness of thought that kept coming in, those faces or those expressions or the sadness that I found in the caregivers, they kept intruding in my mind. And some of them more so because one 81-year-old probably reminded me of my father, right? A 27-year-old reminded, a 21-year-old reminded me of my son. And I kept thinking, what if these things start coming in. So these intrusiveness is something that you find it very difficult. And what happens when you think like that? Your heart starts beating fast, you become more anxious, your sleep is disturbed, you stop exercising, something that I always used to do, like, there is increased arousal, what we call. And then all this leads to, this creates a discomfort. Prachi was saying, right, that emotions, positive or negative, it's there always. But what causes discomfort to you? Some you're comfortable with, some causes a lot of discomfort. And that anything that causes discomfort, you avoid. Right? So these are the three things that generally happens to healthcare providers. And then once the avoidance comes in, it sets in, and they sort of become very impatient, rash in their dealings. And that is where I found this very beautiful poem. Next slide.
I got so carried away by you that.
Yeah, this was a beautiful poem that came out, that talking to the family. This is written by John Stone. My white coat waits in the corner like a father. Okay, I wear it. I meet the sister in the white shoes and organza dress, the milkless husband holding the baby. Okay, I'm not meeting people there. I'm meeting, depersonalized objects like the white shoes, the sister, the sister of the patient or the mother. I'm not meeting individuals there. I will tell them. I'm going to tell them. I'm not talking with them, right? I will tell them. And they will put it together and take it apart. Yeah, they are putting what I tell them together, and they're falling apart after hearing what I have to say. Their voices will buzz. What does that mean? I can hear just their voices buzzing. I'm not listening to them. I reach a point where I am not listening to them. And the cut end of their nerves will curl, but I am not responding to it. I'm not empathetic enough to respond to it. I will take off the white coat. I will drive home and replace the light bulb in the hall. When I take the coat off, right, I'm sort of disassociated myself from the whole scenario. It's just a part of my job. It is not something that I'm doing with empathy or with compassion. Yeah. So this is the end result of what we call the compassion fatigue is. And what does it do to us as doctors or as any sort of social worker, psychologist, or even as a family caregiver? What does it do to us? It, if you live with a sense of dissatisfaction, the balance between what your caregiving becomes more effective when you're compassionate and when you are satisfied with what you are doing, isn't it? So this leads us into a phase where we do it like a zombie, the autopilot mode. You do it without thinking about it. You want to finish the work, you're doing it, not because you want to help others. So this changes. I think this is how compassion fatigue develops, progresses, and even in a people as who read about it, sometimes it is very hard to recognize it when it happens to yourself. I think that is where we need to constantly sort of watch out for it. And I think this is what I had to say from our point of view as a healthcare professional.
When Dr. Seema, if you just hold, I think someone raised their hand. Will you please unmute yourself to ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there a question? Someone raised their hand. All right, I'm going to encourage you to type your question in the chat box or your comment in the chat box, and we will pick it up from there. Going back to you, Dr. Seema, one of the things that has been on my mind for a while, and especially it has gotten heightened thanks to the lockdown, is, with regards to healthcare practitioners, especially, in that we make them representatives of gods, and we make them angels, and we make them, people who save lives. What do healthcare practitioners do with their sense of helplessness sometimes? Because I would think that it is not possible to save all lives at all times. And healthcare practitioners must grapple with inadequacies, helplessness, sorrow. What about that? And how is that related to compassion fatigue?
Yeah. So one of the things that we teach in self-care when you become a healthcare professional is this concept of God sort of dehumanizes you. Yeah. Right? And that is one of the reasons why encouraging that sort of also gives unrealistic expectations to the patients and their carers also. Sort of, you are very much human. It is impossible to live with suffering and not to be affected by it. Similarly, like, there is this beautiful analogy, they says you cannot walk on water without getting wet. Right? So it is something that we have to accept, failures and mistakes. It's like, it doesn't restrict itself to healthcare providers. To all of us, it applies that failures and successes are part of what we are. Mistakes happen. Sometimes you cannot do everything to help, but have you done what you can do to the best of your ability? So one of the important aspects is self-efficacy. Right? As a healthcare provider, you have to be have good knowledge of medicine. You need to have what to do when, whether it is physical care, psychological care, or spiritual care. Upskilling yourself is a must, right? So once you know that you have done everything to the best of your ability, it may not have, the patient may still die despite that, but that is accepted part of it. But have you done everything according to what what is written, what has been prescribed? Have you done that? Okay, that is one thing. And second thing is, most importantly, is the serenity prayer that we all say. Do what you can do, change what you can, but learn to accept what you can't. Learn, that is why we have very good prognostication, what we call, to understand when a patient is likely to survive and when a patient is not likely to survive. When you know that and look at it holistically, and then handling this becomes a little bit easier. Another most important is to reflect upon what you have done. Discuss it, what we call a technique of what we say is called as debriefing.
Mhm.
Discuss this with seniors and mentors. Look at what you have done. Have you done everything that you can in this situation? Is there something that you could have done better? Yeah.
And
And
even if not, what about just be kind to yourself and recognize that you're a
compassionate. I was
human
coming
being?
to that. Self-compassion in the end. When you have done, if you have done everything and still you have made a mistake, be compassionate and learn to forgive yourself. Look at, connect with yourself and learn to.
So one of the things that has been on my mind, and I'd like to bring Prachi in at this point, is that I wonder, like one of the practices in coaching and one of the practices in psychotherapy as well is that a therapist also needs a therapist. And I would wonder whether healthcare practitioners acknowledge that they need their healing spaces, and where is it that they go to ensure that compassion fatigue or the intensity of grief and emotions that they work with does not catch up with them. So, what is your experience about healthcare practitioners seeking psychological support and healing spaces for themselves? What would you do? What would you say?
Wow, that's an excellent point, Bhavna. I think internally there's also a lot of stigma or a mental block amongst a whole lot of healthcare community in terms of seeking professional help for themselves.
Yes.
Uh, I work with this whole group of young professionals just starting out in this field as their mentor, and I see that so many of them are in this field trying to figure things out for themselves. Something has happened in their lives which has brought them forward into this profession, and they kind of want to pay it forward or something of that sort. uh, but they struggle so much with working through what is already there within them, and then when they start practicing early on, this ability to shut the door on the work comes with, and I'm sure Dr. Rao will absolutely agree, it comes with experience and with good training also. And if you've lagged anywhere in these two areas, it's very difficult for you to not bring work home with you in your minds.
Yes.
And when you do that, that happens, it becomes really difficult. But at the same time, when even though you might recognize that I'm somewhere being buried under all that is coming into me, there is also a resistance to go and talk to someone about it, because somewhere that feeling is there that I am myself, and especially mental health care professionals, that I am into this field, I should be able to work it out for myself.
Yes.
uh, then then you start berating yourself that if I'm not able to work it out for myself, then there must be something missing in my competence.
Mm.
But it's not so. I mean, I will give you a very, very simple example. Last night I was having a conversation with my son, and he asked me that, have you ever gone to a therapist? And I said, yes, I have. And then he very simply says, and he's 12, he very simply says that, yeah, I mean, just like if you were a doctor and, if you had had an illness that you were not a specialist at, you would go to another doctor, right? I said, yes, exactly. I mean, that's as simple as that. If you would struggle with something, you also need a space to talk to. You also need a space, a non-judgmental space that can contain your emotions, that can contain everything that is bubbling up inside you, because you're there for everyone who's there for you.
And I think building that infrastructure for yourself is one of the most critical things that
It is.
you can do, whether you are a family caregiver or you are a healthcare practitioner. Building that infrastructure or recognizing that I have a role to play, but I have myself as well, and that I have to care for myself. Dr.
Yeah.
Seema, you were telling me something about self care, and I would like you to bring that point in. And I will, please, I will just share your screen as well.
Yeah, so there are some techniques actually that has shown a lot of that has been developed that can help you sort of cope with things. Okay, especially in a situation like when we are facing a lot of adversity and stress and uncertainty. Even this would apply across situations, especially relevant in today's COVID situation, right?
Yeah.
So one of the there were 5 techniques they said that was extremely important to stay grounded and have this emotional balance. One is promoting a sense of safety. Okay, whenever we are faced with trauma, what happens is there is a sense we feel very insecure. Our intactness, or as a person, or coherence as an individual falls apart. Okay, whether it is illness within ourselves or illness in the loved ones. Like Prachi said, it is, there are multiple roles you're playing and none of it to the best of your ability. So at that point, having a sense of safety is extremely important, physical safety. And that includes eating well, looking after your body, exercising, sleeping well, financial safety, ensuring that, if all aspects of safety is extremely important. And in order, anything uncertain makes us feel unsafe. So also getting enough information about what our illness is or what is the treatment options, what the illness is, getting this information also will give us a sense of safety. So all this happens. And once we get to know everything, what happens to us? There are a lot of emotions going on. Mind becomes distraught. There is loss happening. You feel distressed. At that point, it is important to find out what are the techniques that can help us calm down, right? Whether it is relaxation, for some it could be relaxation, for others it could be going for a walk, for others it could be listening to music. So having a technique that can help us relax. For some it could be mindfulness, any of those techniques which works for us. And this nobody can teach you. You have to reflect upon yourself, see how you have coped in the past and what helps you, and utilize it to promote a sense of calming yourself down. The third aspect is promoting connectedness. Now, this connectedness is also to oneself, understanding, and as Bhavna, you said, you have to be self-compassionate, self-aware, self-compassionate. Okay, look and forgive yourself for whatever mistakes or happen. Also, looking at connectedness with things around you. It could be a hobby, it could be learning something new, it could be friends, family, or it could be spiritual activities. Where do you find the sense of connectedness? In my case, it is with my poetry writing. I find my connectedness there. It serves my reflections come into in the form of a poem, and I am out of distress at that point in time. I calm down. For me, that's the calming technique that I use. I connect to my creativity, right? And then there is, as I said, a sense of self-efficacy, which I discussed before. It is about upskilling yourself, and also it is about promoting hope within ourselves and for those around. And this is one place where I see our newspapers and media, they're constantly promoting a sense of
Absolutely.
adversity, negativity, and taking away hope, whereas we can be ambassadors of hope. And hope does not mean that everything is all right.
Yes.
Right? Hope for a patient who's dying of cancer, being pain free is a good hope, right? For a
Leaving a legacy, perhaps.
legacy, yes, building legacies, having a dignified passing away, having family members around, being at home in the time of death, that can be a hope, right?
Yes.
And for us, for an healthcare provider, you cannot cure the disease, then let me control the disease. That is the hope. If I can control the disease, let me keep the person as comfortable as force, right? So, yeah, so that is
Request the participants to please keep your ends on mute. One second. Yes.
So I think that is where the hope comes in. Hope changes depending upon the situation. Now in Udupi right now, where I am living, probably not keeping the COVID restricted to the hospital scenario is the hope, that we, you quarantine everybody and keep it contained so that community spread does not happen. Whereas in Mumbai, see to it that it doesn't come into the home. That is the hope, right? So hope changes depending upon the situation. So one thing is promoting hope is extremely important and something as healthcare provider, but then hope has to be realistic.
Yeah.
We have to be careful when we talk about hope that it is going to be realistic hope within ourselves. Like if I want to lose a weight, I'm going to, at the end of 1 month, 10 kilos I'm going to lose is not the hope that or the goal that I want, isn't it? So we have to keep it as a realistic hope with everything. So I think if we look at these 5 things in our life and try to implement one activity in each that will make us feel comfortable, that would give us a lot of help us tide over crisis in a better manner.
That's quite a toolbox, Dr. Seema. And I would like, I had a point of reflection on the promoting calming piece. I find that these days there is a little bit of um, calming through things that might not actually be, helpful in the long run. And Prachi, please come in as you hear this as well. I think there is sometimes a suggestion that, let's go for retail therapy or let's go have a drink or, what might be some of the abusive ways which might seem temporarily calming but are not necessarily really calming. So what would you have to say about, recognizing methods of calming that could actually be detrimental?
Um, so what you've brought up, Bhavna, is actually it works differently also on a psychological level as well as on a biochemical level. When we look at a temporary hit, like the kind of high that comes from maybe having a drink or going for a shopping spree, it activates completely different centers in our brain, and it also leads to secretion of completely different neurotransmitters. But it feels really good at that point of time, but it's not lasting. It will go down, and then you will be wanting more. That is why you turn into a shopaholic, or you develop a substance abuse
User.
problem, because
Yeah.
you require the more and more amount of that same hit to achieve the same amount of state of happiness or whatever. It's not actually happiness. True happiness is in a different center of the brain, and true happiness is more sustained. It is a more uh, leveled out sort of a feeling, which does not peak like a temporary hit does. Happiness builds gently, like the all the points that Dr. Rao pointed out. They take effort, but they are longer lasting. They build you up from inside. They replenish you from inside. And anything that replenishes from inside, which fills up your coping cup, is what I like to say, is good. But anything which just rocks the cup a little and makes you feel that you are full but you're not, it's not going to help you, because it's going to drain you even further. I think what needs to be done when we are talking about compassion fatigue, there is an opposing, a healthier, or rather a healthier version of compassion fatigue, which is compassion satisfaction. The goal needs to be, when we are looking at dealing with compassion fatigue, is to move from fatigue to satisfaction. And when you try and move from fatigue to satisfaction, what you need to do is examine why you are here in the first place, because a lot of people get thrust into the caregiver role even when they don't want to.
Yeah.
And or unexpectedly.
Yes.
And compassion is something that varies from person to person. Some people have it more, some people have it less. And when more than reasonable demand is made on that compassion, the fatigue will still set in, whether the person wants to help or doesn't want to help. So you move from compassion fatigue to satisfaction by examining why you are here, what you want to do. And also, I think a very, very important aspect is that the moment you become a caregiver, for whatever reason, whether it is a professional reason or a family reason or personal reason, you experience a transition of identity. You were a certain individual and then you become something else also.
Yes.
Time needs to be taken for this transition to sink in. Overnight, you cannot expect to just go to the other role. I mean, that's what happens with new mothers also, right? Like you, even though you are pregnant for 9 months, but still when you have the baby, it takes so much time for you to adjust to that transition. So the same thing happens in caregiving also. You overnight, your roles shift. And if you don't take the time, because I found it very interesting, all the signs that Dr. Rao mentioned have common components with PTSD. There is intrusive thoughts, there is physiological arousal, there is triggers and all that. There's such common components. So we are definitely dealing with some sort of trauma here. And trauma always needs time, because you can't just shift, you can't flip a switch. And what she was talking about, hope, it's positive expectancy. You've got to develop some sort of a positive expectancy.
Yes, I have some many questions that I'm feeling distracted by, and I'm very keen to bring them in. There was some. I would like for the two of you to dwell on the fact that while compassion fatigue and burnout is a journey, and it is it's a possibility that we want to avoid, but there might be many people who have not been aware of this, and that like sometimes we don't pick it up, but it happens to us. You might know about it and yet not know when it creeps up on you. What do you do once you realize that you have not just hit compassion fatigue, but perhaps hit burnout? What can you do then? And I think that is Alicia's question, Dr. Seema, that there is an experience of perhaps feeling close to burnout. Now, what do I do? It's not preventive anymore.
So it's about re-engaging.
Yes.
Back to life. Okay. So you just the journey has happened over a period of time, right? From feeling stressed out to compassion fatigue to, and finally you're burning out. It has happened over a period of time. Recovery also, as Prachi said, is going to happen, which will take time. Okay, the first thing to know is there any psychological morbidity? Like, are you depressed? Clinically, medically, depression. Are you depressed? If you are medically depressed, then probably you would need treatment for that through medication and whatever psychotherapy is there. Okay, so that is one thing. That is provided there is a illness. You are clinically depressed. The second aspect is about, one is probably taking a short break to heal, to reflect, to think back, and then start re-engaging. Okay, and some of the self-care strategies on the path of recovery, what I said, like introspecting, finding a mentor or a therapist to reflect with. Okay, finding out what are your coping strategies, what are the coping strategies still existing within you that you can use in this current situation. Okay, and starting to use those strategies to re-engage, finding workplace mentors or help buddies who can help you through this journey at your workplace also. Okay, so strengthen yourself at home, strengthen yourself with understanding your coping strategies, find people to support systems to support you at home, I mean, or friends, families, and at workplace also find a source of support. With that, you can slowly start re-engaging back into life. But that again, it is a slow journey, which will happen, probably setting limits and boundaries. Like what I did when I realized was tell my colleagues that, see, I'm in a little bit of a tight space right now. Don't overburden me with these counselings. I may be able to take maybe one session at a time, and if I'm a little irritated or a little short, please understand, just give me some time to get back. Okay, and what happened was I was given a space of probably a few days wherein I could sort of re-engage with myself, do listen to some music. I restarted my Zumba classes to get back into rhythm, right, at workplace. And it's still the process is going on, and the lockdown helped because the work pressure was much reduced. So probably taking yourself from your workplace to find that space is very important. I could do it while still working because the lockdown gave me the space and reduced the workload for me to re-engage. So, but how do we do it? What are our strengths? We have to find it.
Yeah. I think there is also another question in that, which is that I feel exhausted. So one of the symptoms is that I feel exhausted in dealing with people. So either of you or both of you may want to comment on what do I feel when I don't want to interact with anybody, when I've reached that point.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks. Uh, so when you're saying that you don't want to interact with anybody, I'm assuming that you probably you've done a lot of interaction, and then now you've kind of reached a saturation point, and now you feel exhausted, and that's not your regular style of socializing, is what I'm assuming. When that happens, I think when we socialize a lot, or when we are put in situations where we have to deal with people a lot, people also develop expectancies. People start looking at you in a certain way, start expecting you to be in a certain way, and then you also start putting yourself out to meet those expectations. That if I'm going to be online for 7 hours a day, and if my the people that I socialize with expect me to be online 7 hours a day, then if I'm not, then somehow I'm letting myself down and I'm letting them down. But the fact is that nothing stops. If you cut down the from 7 hours, you cut down to 5 hours, you will not miss anything. And somebody who is interacting with you and knows who you really are will get it. I mean, all you have to do is what, like Dr. Rao said, set a boundary, because setting a boundary is in your own hands. If you can't expect other people to set your boundaries for you, because they don't know where your limits are. So when you set clear boundaries, and setting boundaries and then communicating them clearly is as important. You have to let people know that I just need some time to myself, and I will be back, let's say, in this time. When you give a clear indication of the time to people, they also don't get anxious. They don't get into that state, what happened. They won't bother you. They'll give you that time. Then when you come back, you can explain, or if you want to explain, or that's also your call, whether you want it, but you just take your time. And fortunately, taking the time now has become a very acceptable concept. So when you do it, nobody is going to question you, but it's up to you to set your boundary. Don't allow yourself to get swayed by the expectations others set on you, because you are who you are.
Yeah,
Just add one more thing to add here. Sometimes, cutting off this, taking time off from even social contacts, getting to be with yourself also gives you the time to know yourself better, to find out your strengths, and probably find out you need that silence around to understand what is happening within you, right? To understand what you're going through and what your strengths are. Sometimes it helps in a way to reflect and to try out these techniques that we say that might help you. So in a way, taking off from all that also can help, provided, again I keep saying, that it is not part of a clinical depression, or one of those things, like
I think the essence that I get from the points that you have made is, I think, to start with compassion for oneself. It's okay if for a while I don't want to interact with people, so long as I'm aware of it, and so long as I can be kind to it, and I can find my way back in a healthy sort of a way. I'm very keen. There are a few other questions that we can present to the two of you. There is one question from Ara, which says that how do I increase my compassion?
That's a very nice question. I read that.
At times, even though breaks and me time, there is a decrease in compassion towards caring.
I was not able to hear it.
Yes, sorry. Although I give myself breaks and me time, there is a decrease in compassion that I feel towards the person I'm caring for. Earlier, if my mother was in pain, I would run to her. Now I say it's dystonia, ignore it. Maybe I can take her less seriously. How can I go back to be more compassionate?
It's a very nice question.
Yes. So this brings to my mind a very personal experience that I had. My mother had a very bad fall and had a severe head injury, right? Had a severe head injury, and she was in the neuro ICU. She had multiple brain hemorrhages at the age of 76. Probably we didn't expect her to recover. She did pull out of it and developed excruciating headaches. I was taking care of her. I mean, the stress of being with her, knowing what can happen as a doctor, being the caregiver. And I was with her when this headache was so much in the nights. She would get up, she wouldn't let anybody, she would be screaming in pain. And whatever medications we gave wasn't helping her, those periods of headaches. And over a period of time, within 15 days, I'm talking about, I started becoming irritable with her, right? And that started shouting at her,
Yeah.
okay, don't exert yourself too much, this will cause headache again, and you will not let any of us sleep in the night. I realized physically I was tiring out looking after her. Emotionally I was already tired, as it is that, because I had gone through that stress and I had to be strong to help her through at that point in time. And I realized, what am I doing? And it took me, once she came back home, I just shut myself in the room and I cried, held myself alone and cried like a child with nobody around, nobody to console. The whole grief came out. So we have to understand this anger, stress, or irritability that we feel is a part of our grief. The pain has to come out. We try to keep that pain within us and try to keep on uh, caregiving and doing our expected role,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes letting that grief out, and then once that is out of your system, you have cried, you have expressed your pain, maybe with the to yourself. Sometimes it helps you, brings back that sort of a, once you have healed yourself, you have shown compassion to yourself and allowed to feel the pain, then you are able to again care for in a better manner.
Dr. Seema, I'd like to talk about three things. I think that it's absolutely essential that people recognize it's okay to feel grief and to feel pain and to cry. I think there is nothing wrong with it. That is absolutely essential for caregivers to remember, because they kind of keep a very strong front for others. But there are moments of vulnerability, and it is okay to be vulnerable. So I think that the 3 points that I wanted to make was to find spaces of healing. It need not be alone. It can be in support groups, or it can be with some of the others who have been other caregivers. So yes, so for example, there is one could go in for one-on-one therapy, or one could go in for a support group of other caregivers where one will find a sense of understanding. And I also think that when one goes to support groups, you go not just because you want support, but you also have a lot of wisdom and learning to share with others. So it works both ways. And like the point that you were making, that you have to find your recovery back from burnout, can actually be by being with other caregivers, because you can get a sense of having contributed to another person's life through your experience. Um, I think that there are a couple of other questions. Would you like to say something to what I just said, either of you, while I pull out a question from the chat box?
I think the point that Dr. Rao was making 5 minutes ago about compassion when she was answering that question. I think that the simplest thing is that, you know, compassion comes from compassion. And if you have that for yourself, you will be able to give it to someone. And also the point about, you know, not getting so worked up about your dependence condition after some time, that's also natural. You know, you when you encounter that situation initially, the illness or the pain or anything, it obviously bothers you more initially, but gradually as you develop more understanding of the condition, more about the behavior patterns of the patient and everything, you also become habituated to it. And constantly thinking about the difficult situation gives you sort of a numbness, which is also expected. The only thing I would like to say is that every emotion that you're feeling, you let it come to you and don't judge it, and don't judge yourself for feeling it. If you're feeling numb, if you're feeling habituated, sit with it, that okay, you know, right now I'm feeling numb, I'm feeling habituated. All right, this is expected because I've taken care of so and so for maybe 6 months now. It's expected to happen. Let me just observe it and see what is happening to me, and that's all. You don't have to judge, you don't have to analyze that so much. Even if you just give that emotion its space, it's going to come and, you know, float away.
Something that Dr. H.K. Das has said in the chat box is that connecting to your hobbies can give you relaxation. And very often when you're feeling intense, complicated emotions, one could actually draw or paint or express in poetry or do something that kind of gives you a way to be able to observe oneself, like, you know, really take a pause for oneself. Um, uh, I'd like to take this question from Pranabda. Dr. Seema Rao and Prachi Vesh, excellent, mind-blowing, unique presentation, overwhelmed. Physical and emotional exhaustion, burnout, especially during COVID pandemic lockdown, anxiety, fear on part of the primary caregiver. Does psychosocial support and counseling work in a positive way?
I have typed in the reply. Of course, it helps. It also, I put in the reply, I think, for that.
Okay.
Yeah. One is having a group where you can express your, anxiety. A lot of patients or a lot of caregivers are going through this because sometimes the accessibility to a doctor is disrupted because of the lockdown, and that looming uncertainty and threat of COVID being more creating becoming more serious in those with chronic illnesses. All this creates a lot of anxiety. It is not only for patients, for caregivers, even for us. Okay, seeing a patient, which is a normal interaction, has created more, makes us also very anxious. Wearing a mask, removing the mask and keeping it, and everything is compounding the anxiety in all of us. So the one thing that we can do is not to listen to too much of the media news about COVID, right? Learn, get yourself equipped, find the correct information, know what is happening around you, know the precautions that you need to take, but do not get obsessively engrossed in what is happening around. There, a little bit of spirituality comes in. There is one thing that we always believe, that good things happen to good people, right? That's generally what we believe in, like, do good things and good things come back to you. uh, my belief after about 13 years in palliative care is I have seen a lot of bad things happening to good people.
Yes.
Right? So there is nothing like that. Whatever has to come, you have to handle it. You cannot believe, I mean, you will not know what is going to happen in the future, but whatever happens, we have to create that resilience within ourselves to handle what happens. Handling your anxiety, learning to handle your anxiety and your fear is the first step in that process. So there is a lot of self-talk that we do within ourselves. We are the harshest judges of ourselves. We judge ourselves very harshly. Our super ego is very strong. It, judges us very harshly. So sometimes forgiving ourselves for what we feel, accepting what we are, our strengths and weaknesses, and working on to reduce our anxiety, being compassionate towards ourselves, being non-judgmental towards us first before we help others. So sometimes, what they say, put on the oxygen mask first on yourself before you put it on to others. Practice compassion and non-judgmental attitude for yourself. Show concern to your body and your mind, genuine concern. Listen to yourself actively before you practice it on somebody else. I think what we learn, if we apply to ourselves, it becomes easier to deal with the anxiety and uncertainty that comes in.
I'm so, I have been so engrossed with this discussion and the chat box. I just realized that we have bust our time boundary. And it looks like many people want to continue and be here for this conversation, which is a good sign. There is clearly no fatigue here. I would like to bring up one question, which is that, ma'am, how can other family members help the primary caregivers in a way that can help reduce their burnout or fatigue, or just convey a message that we are there for you? I find that well-wishers, so we, in our parlance, we call them well-wishers of caregivers, just to make a distinction. At the end of the day, we are all caregivers. But well-wishers of primary caregivers sometimes don't have the skills or don't know what is it that I can do with the primary caregiver who's experiencing fatigue and is being irritable or snappy. Or, you can't go to a caregiver and say, you're stressed out, let's take a stress assessment tool. I don't think you can have that conversation. So what can you do if you are a well-wisher of a caregiver? Prachi?
Yeah, like I said, Devika asked for a very good question.
Yes,
Because it's not just the caregiver, and we were just talking about this, Bhavna and Seema, the other day.
Yeah.
There's not just the caregiver which needs assistance, because the well-wishers need assistance too. Because many times we want to help, we want to pitch in, but we don't know what to do. Like I was saying the other day, that when I go to someone's place where some tragedy has happened, I find myself quite flustered often. Where to pitch in, what to offer to help. So I think, and this is something I think caregiver Sathi can really come forward and do something on this aspect, that coaching the well-wishers of caregivers on how to take specific steps on reaching out to the caregiver and letting them know that they are there, because the caregiver may not always respond the way you expect them to respond when you offer to help, because they have too many things on their mind, and they can be irritable, they can lash out at you sometimes, or when you offer to help, they may say that do whatever you want to do, I don't know anything to tell you. But rather than taking offense on something, I think somewhere a coaching needs to be done to the well-wishers to understand the state of mind of the caregiver, and to suggest specific steps or areas where they can pitch in and do things for the caregiver, whether by telling them or not telling them, just so that his or her job becomes simpler and easier, so that other peripheral tasks are taken care of.
So we'd suggest two things to start with. So for example, as a well-wisher, and I'll come to you, Dr. Seema, in a minute, the two things that we suggest is to maintain contact with the primary caregiver. Very often, the well-wisher of the caregiver could be at a distance or could meet occasionally, so may not really have a full grasp of what the caregiver is going through. So one of the things that well-wishers of caregivers can do is to maintain a predictable and an ongoing interaction with the caregiver, so that the caregiver feels that, all right, this person is with me. The second, I think, is to never ask, tell me if there's something that I can do for you, is to instead be more specific and say, I would like to do this for you. For example, a specific task like, can I babysit your children? Or can I do this chore for you? Is a better way to talk to the caregiver that a well-wisher can do rather than say, अच्छा कोई काम होगा तो बताना. A caregiver is very unlikely to respond to कोई काम होगा तो बताना. What do you have to say, Dr. Seema?
Absolutely, absolutely. It is better to, if you see somebody in distress, it is rather than asking, like, how I can help, find in your own way, observe and find small ways in which you can help. I think this flows very nicely into Lipika's question, what she has asked, that sometimes the person, especially a doctor or a nurse, thinks that they are doing compassionate care, but others in the team feel it is not. And how do you deal with such a situation?
Yes.
So the idea is you go up to the person and you tell, probably you're not doing the right thing, is not going to work. That is something that, I mean, at least I try to avoid doing. What I do is, probably if the if the doctor is going through compassion fatigue, like, has, is overworked or overloaded, it is for a small period of time, just take off the workload a little bit, offer to, there are 10 patients, 20 patients around, you go and do the rounds. We do this when I see somebody stressing out and feeling tired. I can make out, I tell them, okay, do you want me to look after this ward? I will take your workload, I will take half your workload from you, right? Or I had this incident when one of our young nurses, very pretty, she used to come with all eyeliner, everything, she used to come to work, and there was a death of a patient that she was looking after, who was very close to her age, which affected her. The next 2 days I saw her without the eyeliner. Okay, hair tied. Normally she's very stylish, but very quiet. She has come. So I just called her inside and said, tomorrow I want that eyeliner back. It looks so beautiful on you.
Yeah.
Right? Please put on the eyeliner back and come to work. So what are you doing? You are re-engaging them into their normalcy, bringing back normalcy for them in a very subtle fashion, not by telling, come on, you have to be normal, you have to learn to cope with this. Death is part of what we do. I never went to say anything. Okay, the next day I complimented her, I always see you with the eyeliner on, it looks so beautiful, please can we have it back tomorrow when you come? And the girl came in. Then I called her and made her sit and said, tell me, is there anything you want to share with me? So in a very subtle manner, help them re-engage with life. Okay, probably a very stressed out colleague, I will say, today I don't want to cook at home, I'm alone, can you please come out for dinner with me? Take them out for dinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, rather than telling them what to do, right? Walk with them, talk, be with them, so help them cope. I think that's what is required.
It's an interesting thing we have found in our research that actually caregivers, family caregivers especially, when they suddenly discover that they are caregivers, they don't have the time to invest in building their infrastructure. So, what will be the way in which I will work or look after my caregiving? And infrastructure is not just how I will do things, but infrastructure is also my emotional infrastructure, which is, who will I talk to, etc. Those things are not always very clear for caregivers, especially first time caregivers. And that is something that, well wishers can help them build over a period of time. One of the things that I love from Sheryl Sandberg's book, Plan B, is that, after she had lost her husband, she used to say that a lot of people would ask me, how are you? And I wouldn't know the answer. And I think it applies to caregivers as well. So I'm not going to be okay for a very long time. So my preference is that you ask me, how are you today? It's a very small change. But if you can ask a caregiver, how are you today? Instead of how are you, it can make a world of difference in the kind of response you can get. Yeah. We are at 5:30, And I know that there could be many other questions. We are so grateful to all of you who have been here. And as a matter of just an acknowledgement to the panelists who have been here, can I just get a reaction or a sign from you? And could you just turn on the video so that we could all see you? And briefly, and may I request you to leave your suggestions or feedback or comments in the chat box as we bring this conversation to a close for today. What I'd like to do is remind you that there was a question on, is there an assessment for stress burnout? In response to that, yes, there are multiple tools, multiple assessment tools through which you can assess a caregiver's burnout. There is specifically a tool on compassion fatigue, which is available online. It is called ProQUL, and I could send that link in our follow-up email that will go to all of you. We also have a stress assessment tool that's there on our website. If you're interested, you could reach out to us and we could help you with that as well. And there are many other tools that are available. Some are available online, and some could be accessed through your psychotherapist or your counselor. If anybody has any suggestions, feedback, I would also like for you to mention that. This will help us design our next session. We hope to do an in-depth session on both the ideas of compassion fatigue as well as anticipatory grief. So watch this space for upcoming webinars and sessions because these things impact us. Any closing remarks? Prachi, first.
Just thank you to everyone. I think such a nice crowd, and such good questions that came up. I think that's what makes a webinar a real success, when you have so much of audience interaction. So yeah, just thank you so much for everyone for coming and sitting with us for 1.5 hours, and really being engaged. Very nice. Thank you.
Dr. Seema.
Thank you everyone for being there and listening patiently to us. And the mantra is, you are important. Take care of yourself in this stressful time. Before we look outside, take care of yourself. Love yourself and take care of yourself first. Only then we will be able to take care of everyone around us.
Absolutely.
That's it. And lots of love and compassion, and from me to all of you.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for making this time and making this such a fantastic discussion. One of the things that I'm finding about virtual spaces is that it is difficult to reach out. But I'm going to request each one of you to indulge me in this little exercise. And let's see where this goes. Can you just reach out to your camera on the screen and see if you can make a connection with the others in this virtual room? And those of you who can put on your video, please do so. Thank you very much. I can feel a sensation in my body. I don't know about the others, but thank you. Thank you very much, and have a great weekend.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Prachi and Seema, do you want to stay on for a couple of minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have closed the webinar. I'll request you to sign out. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, ma'am, all of you.
Thank you.
Getting ready to put my mask on.
Sorry?
We are all tied up.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to thank you very much. We can close. So, Dr. Urshi, would you like to sign out? Pranabda, we are done. So, would you like to sign out? Ankita, thank you. Good to see you here. Pranabda, we look forward to have you in the next session as well. Dr. Mirza Beg, thank you for being here. I hope that you will join us for the next session as well. I don't know who's here on Redmi. Thank you, Ankita. Bye-bye. All right. Okay. I am putting people back in the waiting room.
You can remove them, you know.
I know, but I'm just like, I feel that's too rude.
Like, jao.
Because I conduct this CTC training program. Okay, after that we have to do this meet, and we are coordinating with people from Singapore, Lion Collaborative, right?
Yeah.
For them it is 11 o'clock, and these people, we need to discuss something further and then disconnect and finish it off. And people are there, so we just go to the meeting room and remove tuck, 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 tuck. But that is not about compassion. The discussion is about medical thing.
Compassion के discussion में ये नहीं कर सकते हैं.
ये नहीं कर सकते.
So I like, that's what I like. There's a part of me wanting to say, okay, ho gaya, abhi jao.
No, but I think that's nice also that they kind of wanted to hang around. That shows that it went really well.
I think so.
So I got a message from Dr. Nagesh Simha that it was awesome. Karke. He just privately texted.
Oh, yes, I think he left a message on the group.
Yeah, I think I'm so gonna like take screenshots of this chat because everybody said such nice things.
Yes, we are going to save that. I think 1 second.
Yeah.
We will have to think of how we want to send out some of these messages and capture them. There were some that came to me privately. So there's like, I agree with your reflections on support groups.
Prachi, you are there?
Yeah, I'm here.
You froze.
Oh, sorry.
For a minute you were statue mode. You remember we used to play that game?
I started taking screenshots of the comments. So I think probably the camera full.
We team of Karunashray counselors undergo compassion fatigue sometimes. We try to address them, but not to full. Through Dr. Seema, sharing of experience helped us to identify, understand our own emotions, especially to address it. Thanks a lot for, thanks to the Sathi team, especially Bhavna, wonderful and feeling lucky to be a part of this webinar. So many familiar people, great. Okay, thank you for such insightful suggestions. Okay. I think Dr. Narsimha wrote some long, yeah, he said, super session, the issues were discussed with great depth. Well done, Prachi and Seema, and thank you, Bhavna, for this session. Thanks, Dr. Seema. We'll keep in mind coping strategies.
The 5, it's really helpful, you know, that 5, again, Prachi froze.
Oh, I know what happened. Oh,
Sorry.
blame it on the technology, Prachi. Don't keep saying sorry. Thanks for a wonderful session. Thanks very much. Great session. Looking forward to compassion fatigue session. अरे, यही तो था. Okay.
I think it went very well. Like without planning, actually, we sort of, there was a level of comfort in the discussions between.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. So I just want to make sure I've got all the, you've read all the comments, right, at your end?
Yes.
Yes, both of you.
I
That's
think-
good. I'm just relishing them. Like it's feeling nice. Okay. So just to close, you felt that it went well, and just how are you with it? What do you
Yeah.
think will be done next?
You turn, Prachi, your turn.
I don't know what to be done next. I think you should just keep doing these, yeah. And you have few of them planned. I think I had also two of them regarding wills and
Yes.
something else.
No, we are doing a series. We are doing once in 2 weeks, and we are doing
Right.
around the 7 elements of well-being. So the way that we are looking at it is, so we will be doing something around yoga and exercising, which is physiological well-being. So financial well-being we did last session was on managing finances. So we are also doing on legal, which is inheritance and all.
My lap.
Oops,
Oops.
I don't know what happened. She'll come back.
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people today who also brought up their own experiences. Maybe you could reach out to them to give you caregiver stories.
So Alicia and Ara are regulars on our support group.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fairly familiar with them. They are active caregivers. So one of the things that we find is that active caregivers don't share their stories very easily. The erstwhile caregivers, once their caregiving journey is over,
Yeah.
they are able to share their stories much easier.
True.
I think they also fear being judged. किसी ने सुन ली
Possible.
अपनी story.
Possible.
I don't know, Dr. Seema को क्या हुआ? फोन करो.
हाँ, पता नहीं. I have another live session to attend, matlab not like participate, but attend another website that I kind of counsel for is having another live session.
What happened? Hello? Hello?
Today I'm attending a seminar on the paranormal also.
अरे वाह,
3 days.
सही है. Did you drop off or did you sign out? Ayyo. Okay. Yeah. I'll put you on speaker so that Prachi can hear what you're saying and that can work. Yeah. So I was just thinking that we will close the session or in a certain way. So how was it for you, and what do you think we should do next? So Prachi was saying something.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. I think this was a really good idea. I think it went off very well. I had a really good time. And surprisingly, I get very nervous before these live sessions, but today I was like not so, maybe because we'd had that conversation yesterday. I think that really helped to meet up and then, kind of just get to know each other and know what frequency we are at. Yeah, it was a really good experience overall.
Yeah, that structuring helped actually. It created a comfort and we knew what we had to concentrate on and speak about so that we are not into each other's, space.
Yes.
So always that was a good idea to have that
free discussion and structure, I think helps. That's what we are saying. We are asking people to learn to draw boundaries or create infrastructure. So this was like a little bit of doing it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad that the two of you had a good experience. I do think that we need to probably deepen or maybe have a deeper session. 1 hour is always feels a little less because we have so much to share. But great start. I think we got great feedback. We at one point had as many as 60 participants, which is great.
Really good.
Yeah. So please I will be in touch with you if we have to do some more sessions. But please stay tuned in for some of the other sessions that are coming up that you can inform some of the other people.
Will do.
Like I was saying that the idea where we are looking at these webinars is to look at the 7 elements of well-being in the way that we have defined it and say that we will cover all the elements one by one. So if we have covered something like compassion fatigue now, we will cover legal, and we will cover anticipatory grief, and we will cover spiritual well-being, etc. as points of discussion for caregivers, so that the awareness can be heightened. So that's the plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad I got to meet Seema. Seema, it's really, really nice to meet you.
Same here, Prachi. Very nice to meet you too. We need to keep in touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I've saved your number.
Lucknow.
You are in Lucknow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.